Here, isn't it?
Sorry.
Hi, Sarah. So,
Hi.
when you have recently received a secondary diagnosis, there can at times be a dilemma over what, if anything, to say to your children, and also about whether and when to start memory making. What are your thoughts on these two issues?
Hi. Yes. I think this was definitely the hardest part when kids are involved. It's just it was mind blowing, really, and that's why I've sort of answered this question in two parts because I believe that there's part one, it's whether you feel ready to actually ask that question or to even acknowledge that that's something that could even be happening. Because I was in complete denial at first. It was just, no, I'm not dying. I'm going to get through this, like sort of get lost kind of thing. Um, and then the second part was it's about you having like the resilience and the tools and the answers to those questions that will be asked from your children. So it's about sort of being ready psychologically to answer those questions. Um, so in my experience, I was terminal on diagnosis. I was given 12 to 18 months sort of. And I remember sort of on the car coming back from my initial appointment, they said it's not weeks, it's not weeks and months, it will be, it's not days and weeks, it's months or years. And I remember just like going, let it be a year. I need a year to sort it out with the kids, and like Googling how to tell your family you've got cancer. And it was just like, oh, it was just awful. Um, so, and I didn't like the word terminal. It seems so sort of definite. So I got really angry with people and said I got life limiting cancer, and tried to see myself as sort of living with a long-term health condition, because that was my way of kind of dealing with it. So my daughter she was just before her fifth birthday, and my son was 7, and they don't know what cancer means. We've not sort of had an experience within the family. So I was able to say, oh, mum's got cancer. It's in her lungs. And she's going to need some treatment. She might be a bit poorly, but they didn't know what cancer meant. So they didn't really understand that I was sort of dying. So that's what I did at first. And then I think maybe round about after my first brain tumor, we realised it was quite bad. We sort of told them, just let in the car and we're driving along, oh, some people with cancer live less than people without. But some people, some people with cancer are fine, but some people with cancer, they do have shortened lives. And they're like, what, are you going to die? And I was like, oh, no, not necessarily, but some people do. So it was like a drip effect. And that was for the kids. And that was also for myself and my husband to actually deal with how to deal with the situation. So they knew that people with cancer got poorly, and they'd seen me completely sort of bonkers with brain tumors and all my treatment and stuff. So they knew I hadn't been well. So that was how that worked out. And then when I got my second brain tumor and I was told I had 4 to 6 weeks to live, I knew that they needed to know. Because if I just, I was poorly and I died, like, what? It's a shock. Why is, I didn't realize. I kind of felt like they needed that 4 to 6 weeks that I had. So, school let us have a week off. We went to Center Parcs, and just to really make those strong memories. And it was awful. It was awful having to tell them. I was mad as a hatter, having an infection and on steroids and all of this. So it was really sort of bizarre. But I was able to, like, I had a celebrant, and we planned the funeral, and we sort of planned songs. And my daughter didn't want to go, but my son, he went to I said I'd like to get buried at a sort of a woodland burial site, and he went to the site, and we got pictures of him in the trees, and this is where mummy's going to be buried. And he has a Mario sort of passion, so he always dresses up as Mario. And he's there with his Mario mustache and his little hat on, and it was just like, so it was really, and it was bizarre, it was horrible, but it sort of, we just cried a lot. We just sat up, and I was so ill, curled up on the sofa. We cried a lot. And I'd gone to Paperchase and spent, I think, £75 on birthday cards up until their 21st birthday. And I'd written in them, and they're in a box somewhere up there, I think. And I've never given them one, even when I was sort of, I may, if I was alive, I was going to give them a different card. So I wrote all these birthday cards, and I put in all these different messages. So that was quite good. And I'd also, I don't know if people have heard of an app called Record Me Now. If you Google it, it's the most amazing thing I've ever sort of come across, really. And it was one woman runs this whole app, and she's found research. So it's a global app, and it can be used for any culture, any ethnicity, any age. It doesn't sort of discriminate against anything. It's a list of questions that have been brought together, which really sum up someone's life. And it's got different categories. So under each category, there's 4 or 5 different questions. So just some of the questions, you've got one which is about me, your childhood, like happiness, what makes you happy, your experiences growing up, romance and relationships, your career, parenting, your hobbies and your interests, your wishes and the future, and your wisdom and reflections, death and dying, children. And it was a really good list, and there's all these different questions. So I just went through in these last 4 to 6 weeks recording these questions, and you can get it on Apple phones, or I've got it on a Microsoft computer, and it tells me to put a disk in to save it, but you don't have disks on computers anymore. But anyway, so it's all there, and it's all on my phone. So actually, in preparation for this interview, I went back and looked at some of them, and it was a bit of a rabbit hole, really, going down and down and down. But it was nice to know that you could say, right, having the first relationship, let's see what mum would say about that, and you could watch that video. So I thought that was a fantastic resource, and it made me feel very like I was in control a bit more. And I think that's why I did end up telling the kids when I knew it was at the end, was that I was in control. I had a little bit of ownership over my own death. And I think I visibly the weight lifted off my shoulders when I was told. This wonderful neurologist told me that I didn't have very long to live, and he told me exactly. He spent 40 minutes telling me about what it's like to die from a brain tumor, basically just sort of peaceful and all of this. So I went home thinking, F this, got rid of all my juices and my vegan food, and was eating macaroni cheese out of the pan, had loads of white bread and butter, and that visibly just I could stop. I was permanently living in sort of fight and flight, and that kind of gave me a little bit more control. So that's how I sort of spoke to my children about it. And when we thought about memory making, there's a book called The Memory Box. I was supposed to get my books ready. There's a book called The Memory Box, which it's something that you do once someone's died. So I'd made boxes and I had ideas for it, but I sort of left that to be something to be done with my husband to do. And I didn't really want to do that. I found that really difficult. So that was why. So that's sort of my journey. I only actually told them that I was dying when I was given 4 to 6 weeks to live, and it's you will not make it to your 39th birthday. And this was just before. And in hindsight, I'm a little bit well, it's great 4 years later that I'm sort of still here, and I have a fantastic relationship with my kids, kind of from being very honest and open with them. But I had to be ready to do it. And my husband and I, we had to be very much on the same page and agree what we were doing. And it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But one of my friends told me when she was 10, her dad died of cancer. And she said just the best thing for her was that people were honest with her. They didn't lie. So she knew what was going on. And that really resonated with me. And I had to sort of be brave, because it was for my friend Becky, the fact that everyone was honest with her and they weren't lying, that made such an impact on her memory of her dad and her family, and how her family are so close. And I thought, right, I'm going to have to be brave and step up, and sort of for those last 4 to 6 weeks, have that time, you know, just sleep in the same bed with them, just do everything with them, just have them off school, just so they can remember that time. Yeah.
Let me ask an extra questions again. Just go back to the beginning when you were describing how that news was given, because again, I'm just seeing the links between sort of conversations we have and different things that resonate with people. The finality that comes with hearing the word like terminal, and it has very, very different connotations for different people. I think you'll pick this up, not just for yourself, but other people you've met over the years as we have. Some people take that in its most literal sense, which is, you know, almost a closing down needs to begin. And I think others see it as it's another word for stage 4, is another word for incurable, is another word for living with. I think you've already used that phrase. How, in your case, when you were given that diagnosis and told, you know, that you had 4 to 6 weeks, that in its probably most typical sense is what you describe as terminal, when you know there's less than a year.
Yeah.
But how limiting a phrase do you think it is for people, as opposed to telling somebody that you have a spread of your cancer, and then giving people, you know, sort of a rough prognosis? But there's obviously, prognosis is exactly that. It's based on averages rather than the individual themselves. And it's not to say that everybody who gets secondary cancer diagnosis will live as long as you know, to where you are now. Others survive longer, others survive shorter. I think we've all met people who have had both, you know, both ends of it.
Yeah.
I'm just intrigued in terms of what your thoughts are in terms of the language that's used around this, because we did an awareness week a couple of years ago on this, where we talked about how confusing some of these terms are and how limiting it can be on somebody's own perspective of their own situation. Like, to one person, if you tell them terminal, they will just close down and they'll see no hope. What's the point in trying? Everything is just at its worst end. Other people see it as, I think, almost as a challenge to themselves. To say, well, if you're telling me I am this, I'm going to show you that I'm not that, and I'm going to go and, like you've described, you know, sod the healthy food and the you know, and the juices, and just go and eat a burger if that's what you really feel like that day. And that's not, you know, just to know, that's not to play down the impact that does have on many, many people at all. But I think it's just always something that I'm really interested in, as is wording and the impact of wording and terminology on different people.
That's a really, really good point. And I'm furious with the language that the medical profession use. You know, my background's a public health specialist, so and health promotion. So it's very much about the social model of health, and how actually you can impact, rather than the medical model, which sort of, you're not seen as a person, you're seen as a diagnosis, you're almost seen as a group of cancer cells and not a person. So being told that you are terminal, it really infuriated me. In our local cancer support centre, I went for like some complementary therapy, and he said, "Oh, I see, so you've got terminal cancer." And I was like, that I wasn't ready to be a terminal patient. So I say I'm living with life-limiting cancer. And that's why with my oncologist 2 weeks ago, I said, I don't know what my status is. I'm really confused. I know Fiona's seen my video that I did with Hero of Health, and I found I didn't know what my status was. That interview really messed with my head. And that's when he finally said, "Oh, actually, you're in remission," because they don't like to say that word. They don't like to be wrong. And also they don't want to give people false hope. But I've highlighted here, I think hope is so important in terms of recovery. And there's someone called Neil Binderman, which has a Hero of Health video on the YouTube website. If you Google Hero of Health Neil Binderman, he had a brain tumour, benign, and he's done all this research, and actually having hope gives you better life chances than exercise and diet and medication. It's having hope. You can have no medication, rubbish diet, but if you've got hope, then you have better life outcomes than someone who does all the medication but doesn't have that feel worthless or hopeless. And it's like, for me, I think my recovery journey started when I left hospital and was given those few weeks to live. And I said I could just stop. I stopped being in that constant state of fight and flight where I was permanently juicing organic carrots and random stuff and being vegan and all. When I did that, I got 2 brain tumors. When I did this whole program, I got 2 brain tumors, and they said it will come back, you know, that will just come back and kill me. And then I stopped, and it was almost like there was a release in my body. And I know it's hard to prove and all of this sort of stuff, but for me, I think having hope. So I've put down being empowered and hope and love. Those 3 things are like core values, which I think the love of my family and my friends, and the empowerment of having control over my own health, like my own death, being in control over my own death, planning my own funeral, made me have more of a purpose. I don't know if I've gone off on a tangent, but that's just my reflection.
It is. But I think that is exactly the point, though, isn't it? It is to every individual. What, you know, to one person, it will be quite right for them that they want to change their diet, because that is the
and I do that as well. Yeah.
Whether there's whether an impact, you know, physically, or whether there's a placebo impact. If it works for that person, it works for that person. Not doing so will work for somebody else. Equally, you know, different people take a perspective of, well, throw the diet out the window because that's obviously not making a difference, but living better is, or exercise. You know, there's proven impacts of, you know, of exercise, or, you know, in terms of cancer and the research into all these different aspects. But I think my question was more just about the fact that to the individual, certain words applied to different people can lead to very, very different perspectives, as opposed to a more gentler, a more gentle application of certain words. I always think terminal is a really loaded term. I would presume, and I presumed whenever I used to hear it years ago, long before, you know, my own wife's diagnosis, is that terminal is when it's less than a year. And to apply terminal when somebody isn't less than a year is living with cancer or living with secondary cancer. But equally, I know many people who live with secondary breast cancer consider themselves as having terminal cancer, because it will eventually, they will succumb to that, you know, at some stage. But I think it's the issue with any area. I think when the outcomes are so wide, I think it breeds different words coming, you know, being applied to different people. But I'm just intrigued by sort of what you do. Yeah,
I think the language thing, what sort of makes it hard. People use a terminal illness because a lot of it is linked to the D1500 form, which is what gets you your benefits. So I don't know how this works, but so if you're given six months or less to live, you get this D1500 and you automatically get your PIP and your benefits. So when I went to this hospital thinking I had sarcoidosis, they said, right, we're filling in this form. This form means you've got less than 6 months to live. Don't worry, we're just you've probably got longer, but we're doing it so you can be fast-tracked into the benefit system. So I think a lot of that terminology is so you can, it's almost like the worst case scenario. So that's what gets you your benefits.
Just communicating that to people as a good reason as to why it's put it down, rather than it being just a label. I think there's an actual systematic reason as to why to do it, is for the person's benefit. But I think it's the psychological impact that comes with that is the difficult thing to counsel. But
just linking to the psychological impact. So I had lots and lots of hypnotherapy because I'm completely blood phobic and used to pass out in biology lessons at school. So I went to see an amazing hypnotherapist who sort of specialised in people with cancer, and he would talk about the bell curve and how, although your average is 12 to 18 months to live, you could be at this end here, which is 5 years plus. And he taught me how to shut down the fight and flight. So it meant I was two lots of my heart surgery, I had to be awake, and I was able to have all of this surgery and all of this stuff done using the hypnotherapy, because it shut down my fight and flight system. And you know, I emailed him last week saying I'm in remission, and he's had quite a few people who that sort of happened to. So there's something about sort of the psychological impact of negative language. And just to say, there's a really good book called Radical Remission. I've forgotten the author, but if you put it into Google, and it's basically It's just recordings of people who've had radical remission. So I'm a radical remission. And if you want to have positive stories, so you're not always seeing the negative, and when you look at research, it's all the negative stuff. It actually just gives you situations where people have just had a radical remission. And the analogy that they use in the book that I steal all the time is that in like the 1930s, no one had climbed Mount Everest. It was seen as completely impossible. And then some reason one person did it. Wow, isn't that great? Then the next year, a few more people did it, and then they got better equipment, and they found better routes, and they got better guides, and lots of people went up there and died. Some people went up to the top, and then they died on their way down. Lots of people have never attempted to climb Everest, but now there's been thousands and thousands of people who do that, and every year it gets more and more people because people are learning. So you see, like the new techniques is like the new treatments, the new things. So it's about, rather than just saying, oh, it's terminal, that means I'm dying. Well, actually, a few people make it. It's not to say that everyone will, but it's just to give you that hope. And I think, because I honestly believed I was dying, and I was kind of fine with it. I'd sort of reached my, self-actualization of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'd had this love in my family. I'd really reevaluated what my life was about. And I had this self-actualization, which had linked the feelings of like hope and peace and calmness. And that fight and flight was gone. And I just think sometimes that can have such a positive impact on healing journeys. So linking it to the language, it's about trying to use, like I say, I'm living with life-limiting cancer rather than I have a terminal illness. So it's personal preference, but that to me is
Cool. Thank you.